We are going to call this meeting to order now. It is 6:42 on December 8, 2022. And this is a public meeting on the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission. This meeting is subject to Oregon state law and City Portland administrative rules and will be recorded. Spanish language will be available for this meeting. When accessing the Spanish language interpretations, you will see the video feed from the speakers, but the audio feed will be replaced by the interpreter. We will notice that to access this, they will need to click on language interpretation on the Zoom meeting controls at the bottom of your screen and select Spanish. We just have a note that our interpretation on a cell is not going to be available today. Okay. The city also, okay. We're gonna turn that. Finally, the closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. Please note that this is an automatic captioning services and is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon State Law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the function is enabled for commission members. The chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click the Q&A icon in the middle of the screen. Then I will pass it to the co-chairs.
The city previously asked for a moratorium on land acknowledgements, and the PAC honored that request. We are happy to see that the city now displays a land acknowledgement in City Hall, which is, we acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past in working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters. And I will pass it back to facilitators.
Thank you, Co-Chair Jay. Now we're going to review our community agreements. like other meetings, we're gonna give time for commissioners to read these community agreements and these 2 pages. Okay, and like other meetings too, what we have read the community agreements, and we're gonna, do we all commit to the following the community agreements for today's meeting and to go call in our college and collaborators if needed? If I can see. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'm gonna pass it again to the co-chairs.
Thank you, Victoria. This meeting is part of the Police Accountability Commission's powers and duties phase of work. It is expected to go into January and will end when all 3 of this phase's outcome documents are approved. This is the first of several phases in which the PAC will directly begin deciding what will go into the recommendations the PAC will send to City Council for a new police accountability system, including the new oversight board. This phase focuses on the functions of the new system. Future phases of work will develop the form of the new system as well as how it relates to the rest of the city government and the transition plan from our current system to the new one. The commission will present all proposed changes to the City Council in 2023 for their consideration and approval. Following today, here are the next few meetings of the PAC. The Subcommittee on Officer Accountability will have a longer work session on Saturday, December 10th, and another meeting December 19th. The Subcommittee on Access to Information meets December 12th with a briefing from Independent Police Review, and it will meet again on December 29th. The Subcommittee on Structural Oversight will meet on December 15th. And this is another way of displaying the same information on the previous slide. We're trying out a different way to visually display what's upcoming. This slide is the current project plan for the powers and duties phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It will be updated as needed throughout this phase of work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among commission members as to the functions of the new system. Today's meeting is part of the blue box with the red border near the center of the screen. This slide shows the outcome documents for the powers and duties phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the commission. These documents each correspond to one of the subcommittees. One document will focus on how the new system will access needed information to do its work. The second on how it will handle administrative misconduct allegations against individual officers. And third on how it will contribute to structural oversight of the police bureau. Today's meeting agenda includes our monthly equity training. There will be reports from subcommittee co-chairs and our engagement and communications coordinator about their various areas of work, and members can ask questions about each of those too. The commission has 4 discussion items today, including a possible request to the city council for an extension for the PAC, definitions of council mandated terms, a look ahead to future phases of work to better understand what's coming up next, and a continuation of last month's conversation around potential charter amendments to propose for voter approval. The commission will hear public comment, and towards the end of the agenda, will approve up to 3 new co-chairs for subcommittees. I will pass it back to Victoria.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tirsa. Now, our next item on the agenda is our equity training. And let me see, you received an email, an invitation to read chapter 8 and chapter 9 of the book we have been reading since we started, the Racial Healing Handbook. And I'm not gonna ask who read it. Hopefully you have time to read it. It's a very light reading. It has a lot of reflection, and it really helps when you read the material because it will support your community and your participation and engage in the whole commission. Okay, let me see if I can screen share my let me, what is, okay. A bit, it's share. I haven't, okay. Share. As I was talking the chapter 8, we're not gonna do read or review the whole chapter because we already read it, but the chapter 8 is the from the Racial Healing Handbook, and the name of the chapter is about reclaiming your whole racial self. This chapter, what it has done is teach us how to use our own unique intersections of privilege and oppression, experiences, stories, and actions to explore other identities that are significant sources of transformation and liberation in order to support our healing from racism. And this, okay. Who are you? It's really this chapter what really questioning me to keep it local and immediate is who I am. Really who I am, besides being a brown woman and an immigrant, who I am. We all have so many identities, and our identities provide privilege and oppression under unjust system that we all live. Just as your race gives you either within the system or racism. For instance, your gender identity or sexual orientation. For example, there is an example here, Black straight men can be heard differently in a business meeting. There are Latina lesbian women. And it gives the reference of the page, but about this example. Is that, and I have the meaning here, but if somebody can give me or share with me what means intersectionality? Or what do you think it means? Yes, Ajay, go share, please.
It's a framework developed by lawyer Kimberly Crenshaw, specifically to describe a case that she was working on where basically it was thrown out because they couldn't prove that there's discrimination against white women, and then they couldn't there's discrimination against Black men. And so therefore they didn't have a case based on gender or race. But Kimberly Crenshaw had determined that that Black women in particular experience a unique form of oppression that's based on their race and gender, not just on one of their identities. So it's kind of come to mean this understanding where it's compounded levels of marginalized identities as opposed to just having one.
One identity. Thank you, Co-Chair. That's a very, very good description. And this intersectionality really make us think about the ways that how things overlap in their identities, right? For example, as a Latina, as a brown woman, if I have a higher social class, can also buffer the impact of racism that other women of color, other brown women can experience. And also experience deep poverty can blunt some aspects of white privilege as well. And I have, you say it very good, but I have from Portland United Against Hate, I have intersectionality is the idea that race, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, national origin, disability, and many other individual characteristics. Like, for example, having an accent, right? And not being an English speaker, or not having documents to live here and work here legally, etc. Can overlap with one another and impact one's experiences and worldview, especially related to privilege and discrimination. Now, I wanted to ask you, why do you think it is important to recognize privilege? And it can be, remember, there is not wrong answers, just is exactly what we're seeing in this chapter, that everyone has a different experience. And if you can, several of you can give me an idea, what do you think is important that at this work, at this moment, with all the work the commission has to do and all the things you have to put together, what is important that we take in these minutes and recognize privilege? What do you think? And also I noticed that Commissioner Debbie and Obi, their camera is not there, but you are welcome to participate, even if we cannot see you. It's nice to see you, Commissioner Obi. I will pass it to Lovisa. Commissioner Lovisa.
Sure, I was just going to say, I think it's important to recognize privilege, because recognizing privilege is like a way of recognizing power in a space, and giving, sort of like naming out loud something that can and does exist like silently in pretty much every human interaction and in every dynamic, every social dynamic, every professional dynamic. There's power dynamics. And so I think of recognizing privilege as a way of speaking to and recognizing power dynamics.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovisa. Very well said. Thank you. Who else? What do you think is important to recognize or think about privilege? Co-chair Ajay, please.
I think that it's very normal and natural for people to kind of universalize their own experience. So they think, the way that they live or how they live their life, other people live a similar life. And so in that way, privilege can be very blinding. Just as, a concrete example, I've talked about my college experience with friends, and, the friends that have parents that went to college, they had help with their applications in ways that I didn't, and they didn't even think about that. And the friends that had parents paying for school, they didn't have to have a job during college, and I had to have two. And so these are things they're not even thinking about. And so based on that, you know, they might think, well, college is easier, or anybody can get through it, or why do we need to have financial aid, or why do we need to have this? Because they don't understand the experience, because their privilege doesn't allow them to see that other people don't necessarily live the same life.
Thank you. Yeah, and some things we have these filters, right? Because our experiences give us these filters with not only about race, but also about gender and religion and disability, and all this give us just filters that we are not able to see. That's very good. Thank you. One more, if we can have, why do you think your personal point of view? Yes, Commissioner Catherine?
So as relevant to the work we're doing here, I think that depending on your privilege, you will experience policing differently and will be policed differently. That's part of privilege, I think, is whether you get the benefits of our policing system or are victimized by it.
Thank you. That's a very good point. I remember in one leadership group, ALF is a leadership in the state, and the police came and they asked, who is afraid of police? And immediately all people of color raised their hand. And the white participants, they were not people of color, were very surprised that we were afraid of police. And that's, you are exactly right. We experience and we see it differently. Like being undocumented, you see a police and it's a very different experience than not having documents. Yeah, Commissioner Sophia, thank you.
I just kind of had a comment and a thought process that I had experienced recently about someone who said that they did not understand that they had white privilege. They didn't get it because their world didn't include anybody but the privileged. And some of the comments already have been, you know, we take our experiences from what's around us. And why is it important to recognize that you have it? I mean, she was also telling me that, you know, history, she had no idea of the real history, you know, for minorities in the US. She said she was baffled. And I kind of was thinking of this term, and it comes out sounding a little funny because it's like, why is it important? Because they don't have any skin in the game. And when I say skin, I mean color, skin color. It's important to recognize when you don't have skin in the game, you don't get what goes on with other people, and you need to know that because you don't have any. It's saying it's not important to you, but it's important to the other people. And the reason why it's not is because your skin doesn't reflect anything that goes on in these other people's lives. So, so it's just important to know that, you know, when you have white privilege, you have to recognize that you don't have any skin in the game. So it means that you have to put more energy into understanding the other side, because you don't have anything to lose if it doesn't work. Like the commission, you know, if this doesn't go well, or if it doesn't work, the only people who are losing are the people of color. The people of privilege don't lose anything if it doesn't work. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia. Thank you. Is there any other, we can go to the next? Okay. The next is like, it's just to put, is to put an exercise, right? An exercise of Where do you fall with your multiple identities? Do the following racial healing practice. I invite you to do it in your head or using a pen. But it's type of operation is the first column, target group, and then no target group. And we have only a couple, right? Because then we also come about mothers or fathers or immigrant status, language. There is so many. Right? It's racial, target group, people of color, non-target group, white people, class, poor, working class, no target group, middle, owning class or high class, gender, women, transgender people, no target group, men, sexual orientation, lesbian, gay, bisexual. There are some examples, right? No target group is heterosexual people. Ability, people with disabilities, target group, or non-target group, people without disabilities. Religion, non-Christian or Christian. Age, people over 40, no target group, young people. Youth, children and young adults, and no target group, older adults. Rank and status, people without college degree, people with college degree. Military service, Vietnam veterans, and again, it's just an example. Veterans of other wars, right? They see different. Immigration status, immigrant or US born. Language, non-English or English. Now, for example, I'm American citizen. I become American citizen last year. And when I say, where are you a citizen? And I say, yes. Are you an American citizen? Yes, but where are you from? I'm from here, but I'm an American citizen. But where are you from? You cannot be an American citizen. I say, I am an American citizen. And I told that to my son too, even if he was born here. Just the world around us in Uber and the supermarket, at school and the government remind us about why we are target group or not target group. Everything reminds about this. And the next slide is a description of some social identities. Disability or ability and ableism. How do you think you perceive the disability of others intersecting with race? Who would like to make a comment about this? What did you think? Or what perspective? Is there any? Or put something in the chat. Yes, Commissioner Charlie?
I'm going to kind of simplify it to the way I see this is even if, let's say, a non-target white male has a disability or has some of these other things going on in their life, they don't have like a person of color having the same issues, but it's smothered in racism. You know, do you know what I'm talking about? I don't know if I'm addressing this properly, but that's kind of how I see it. So when you say, how do you think you perceive the disability of others intersecting with their race? I feel like I don't know how to properly say this, but we always have to racialize when it comes to all these other identities, because then we become the major target.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Charlie. Thank you for your perspective. Thank you. Commissioner Angie?
I feel I have seen that people of color with disabilities, that a lot more of it seems that people want to think that everything that happens to a person of color when they first look at them is, because they make poor choices. I think that, and I hate to say, I mean, but it just seems that at least from what I have seen in the past, that if there are two people that were disabled right next to each other, I think that the person of color might have more judgment on them about why, and that if it is a cis adult white human, there's a lot less judgment about why. It's more of oh, that's, this is the way it is, and there's no judgment there. I just feel like with that first swipe of seeing somebody that is different, that there is a lot more judgment that is given to the situation.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Angie. And I see Commissioner Sima raise his hand. Oh, maybe.
Oh, greetings. I'm sorry. I just raised my hand so I can be let in as a panelist.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Apologies for being late, everybody.
No, we are very happy you're here. Thank you and welcome, Commissioner. Commissioner Dunn?
Well, I'm kind of looking at the whole slide here. I know you just talked about disability, but disability is one of the categories that is coming to mind, that like disabilities aren't always visible. Religion is not something that is always visible unless somebody happens to be wearing something displaying their religious beliefs. And I think one of the things I have not seen in these trainings is political discrimination, which I think exists also and is very similar, where unless you have something that you're wearing or some other way that somebody can tell your political perspective, that discrimination doesn't, isn't the same as racism, because people aren't looking at you and saying that, they discriminate, but you do get, people do get discriminated against for their political beliefs. And I think that's an important thing to remember.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunn. And it's a very good point. There is some characteristics on our intersectionality that are not visible, right? You cannot see me and see my religion, or you cannot see me and see my political affiliation, but they also bring factors of discrimination or also bring factors of privilege. Depends on the situation. It's a very good point. Thank you. Yes, Co-Chair Ajay, please.
Yeah, regarding disability, women in general, but especially women of color and especially Black women are less likely to be believed about our pain. And in fact, there was a very famous Black trans woman that died just this week. And her last tweet was, "They're mistreating me, they're not believing me, and I think I'm going to die." And she did. And so this happens every day with Black women specifically. And so in terms of like chronic illness and pain and that kind of disability, like that is an ongoing issue. Also just access to medical care. A lot of people of color, especially Black folks, especially Indigenous folks, just don't have the level of access to healthcare that other people do. And when they do get that access, they get subpar treatment because of the biases of the doctors, who in general don't tend to be from the same kind of economic or racial background. So just something to keep in mind.
Yes, thank you, Coach. And then we see it over and over for Indigenous and Black when doctors don't believe they're in pain, or they don't think, they don't listen to them, or they cannot speak the language and they cannot communicate as well. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Lovisa?
Sure. I was also kind of looking at the slide. I was looking at the next one about gender and sexism. And the question is, how do you think you perceive the gender of others intersecting with their race? And I was just kind of wanting to go back to intersectionality. And like, I think Commissioner Jay gave a really great definition and background of it. And I also just wanted to kind of like emphasize that like part of the point of intersectionality is that our identities are not merely additive, that they are transformative. And so like I'm a Black woman, so I'm not just like Black plus a woman, like I'm a Black woman, and that is like its own whole entire extra separate thing, and that I have a different experience because of that. And so I kind of am looking through these kind of categories, and I'm just wanting to, you know, kind of remind everyone that like you know, a person of color with a disability, like those are not just additive things, that those are transformative things.
Thank you. That's also a very good point. And at the notes, they say the system notes as ableism favors able-bodied and disadvantaged those who have disabilities, autism, cerebral palsy, dyslexia, and learning difficulties are a few examples of disorders that are present from birth, but others may develop over time, wearing glasses, movement challenge, short-term wheelchair use, etc. Like all social identities, racial privilege can be added to another privilege when a race and ability interact, as when one is a white and able-bodied. You then also your gender may coincide with the sex you were given at birth. This identity is not being cisgender, that's mentioned here. You may identify as trans or gender non-conforming, non-binary, genderqueer, or another gender, or with no gender at all. And this also brings brings oppression where your sex that is given at birth doesn't match your gender identity. And you express your gender, you can express your gender by appearance, choice of haircut, or other actions. Gender expressions can be classified as feminine, masculine, androgynous, or none of this. And it talks about all these different examples. And really what the charter was to really make us think about this and make us more aware of others, right? And our level of identification, for example, with religion or spirituality, basically whether you believe in the existence of God or another higher power, is referred to as your religious identity. Christian privilege, a defining characteristic of religious and spiritual privilege, is widespread in the West. Depending on where in the world you are, it could differ. Additionally, when people presume others who fall under the category of atheism, such agnostics or non-believers, are wrong or misguided, and they are exercising religious privilege. And this goes on and on. But is there, looking at this slide, is there any other comment about how these different characteristics intersect with race? Any of these ones? Yes, Commissioner Sophia?
I just want to make a comment about the social class and classism. You know, my experience has been people assume your social class based on your race. no matter whether you have all of these, I call them obvious signs of a certain class. When you're a minority, you're always thought of as being in that lower class, no matter what. And that's something I've just seen so often, or they figure that you don't have the education or whatever based on your race or your color of your skin. So social class, and if you do have, like, say, a nice car, it has to be, you know, comments such as, oh, it must be drug money, or they must have done something illegal to get it. Because I can remember getting a new car and getting pulled over by the police because I guess I was Black and I shouldn't have had a new car. You know, so there's a social class, the assumptions that come with social and economic classes with your race. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's another point you said, social class. I remember when I was in intensive care with my daughter, and I spend most of the time next to her, and I can hear the nurses and the doctors thinking I didn't speak any English, and also saying, oh, look, that woman and that kid is taking a lot of money from our taxes, because they assume I didn't have insurance. And I had, at that time, a very top of the line insurance. And they were like, yes, of course, we're just wasting our resources, and that girl is not even gonna live, is gonna die soon, or is not worth it. She has Down syndrome. And I understand everything. And we have very good insurance at that time. Just assuming, right? But yeah, classes are very, very real as well. Did you have another comment about this slide? Okay, we pass it to the other slide. And we finish our reflection on chapter 8. I'm not gonna go to chapter 9. We will wait for Dr. Moses, that she's the expert, to really reflect on that in chapter 9. But like, I was gonna give a little taste of chapter 9, that way hopefully you read it. And it's very important because it's the work we're doing here and you're doing, and you will choose and decide and committed to do. Chapter 9 is about being a racial ally. And it really gives us what ally really means. And we're not gonna define everything, because again, it's like an invitation to read this chapter. And that invite you to write about 3 opportunities you have right now, and you can think about it, a bit, every one of us, a bit a racial ally, at work, at school, with your family, friends, in your community. And then it has another question to reflect: how do I take action in the moment as a racial ally? And they invite us to write about at times as a racial ally where you were somewhat effective in your efforts, but you could have been more effective. Or after that happened, you say, oh my God, why I didn't do this? And I just gonna say, ally is a person who actively supports others who are the victims of racial injustice, prejudice, and discrimination. That person is not a racial ally. The core elements of allyship is that you should use your privilege, and we all have privilege, to challenge oppression. A white racial ally is someone who has made a significant effort to increase their awareness of the subtle or overt ways of racism within yourself and within your relationships. And just to end, there is the list that, and she's gonna go through that, but the do and don'ts of racial allyship. And invite us to stay humble, apologize. I have made and continue making a lot of mistakes, right? Being a good listener, because that's the only way I can learn. Believe in the experience that people of color have. Continuing to educate myself about racism, and connecting with other racial allies. Why shouldn't we don't appointing yourselves a racial ally, like I know everything, pausing your racial allyship, participating in call-out culture, talking about how you're a racial ally at every chance you get, thinking that you have all the answers to solve racism or that you are more enlightened than your fellow white people or people of color, avoiding feelings of grief and loss. And I will say we all have the power to discriminate. Only an exclusive few, and I will consider you, have the power to make policy and to make change. And that's a privilege. And we invite you to be anti-racist, and you are a force of change. Thank you very much for being with me in this very short reflection. It really has been, and I wait for all your comments and your participation. Thank you very much. We'll have a break. Let me see if there's something. Let's come back at 7:35. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. We will now move to hearing. We're going to start the meeting and we already resumed recording. We will now move to hearing reports from the 3 subcommittees and then from the staff on community engagement. I will now pass it to the co-chair of it to discuss the subcommittee on access to information. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick update for from the subcommittee to access to information. Hey, can you guys all hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Perfect. So we had our first meeting already, and our second meeting is going to take place on Monday the 12th. Currently, we are split into a few groups between the 6 of us and are looking into things such as accessing police records, subpoena power, compelling testimony, and then data required, including body cameras. We are going to have a good meeting coming up where we're going to have 2 members of IPR brief us for 45 minutes. So I invite anyone else who, even if you're not in the subcommittee, to join in and watch. And hopefully from there, we'll have around 2 weeks until our next meeting, in which we can formulate a plan and start our final documents, and then have a meeting in the end of December, as well as one early to mid-January, and kind of finalize our documents before sending them to the full commission. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about that? Or this is a quick update. Any questions about that?
I don't think they have questions. Thank you, co-chair.
Thank you. And one more thing, which is going to clearly come up later this evening, is I am the only co-chair for the access information. So I'm sure, going to discuss a second co-chair, but I'll leave that to staff to discuss later on. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Coming soon. Okay. I will now pass it to the co-chair, Charlie and Dan, to discuss the subcommittee and officer accountability.
Okay, well, my co-chair and I talked about this earlier, so I'm going to do the first part. I'm going to turn it over to co-chair Michelle Wesley when I'm done with my half. So the Subcommittee on Officer Accountability held 2 meetings on November 21 and December 5. We asked that the name be changed at the first meeting. It was unanimously agreed upon. It used to be called the Subcommittee on Individual Accountability. So everybody at the meeting agreed, and the commission co-chairs approved that. So the subcommittee's co-chairs put together a draft outline for us to work on. We're looking at the various stages of investigation into possible misconduct incidents. So those stages are intake, investigations, findings, discipline, and then these are stages, well, appeals and mediation. But those are part of our scope. We brought in the parts of the research documents from the last phase that were related to each one of those stages, and we're in the process of adding information from the current system, the police association contracts, and community input. And I'll turn it over to my co-chair, and then I have a comment at the end after we're done, or a question really.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Okay, so we have also scheduled a long work session on this Saturday, where we hope to be able to break into a couple of groups so we can work simultaneously through at least the first 4 stages. These are the most complex sections that we'll be working on. And as co-chairs, we have pledged to engage in communication and collaboration while the subcommittee completes its work and while adhering to the police accountability values of equity and inclusion, anti-racism, harm reduction, transparency and trustworthiness, community-centered, and effectiveness. And we just want to thank, all our amazing members, commission members who have volunteered to help us, even though they're not necessarily on the subcommittee yet. I'm gonna throw that in there. And want to thank staff and the facilitators so much. Back to you, Co-Chair Dan.
Thank you. So the question I had regarding that last comment is it possible for people who are not members of the subcommittee to participate in the discussion anyway, if we're not voting on anything? So I'm asking that particularly because one of our members is not going to be able to make it on Saturday, and it'd be nice to have at least one more person to help us kind of push our way through this document that's, by the way, grown to be 30 pages long. So I'm asking staff if there's any limitations on other members of the commission joining the discussion if we're not voting on things.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan, and I will pass it to staff.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm gonna need to double check in the long-term sense of it, but for Saturday, there's no problem at all. The format of that being different, the work session terminology, all of that, and allows for a little bit more flexibility there. So for Saturday, no problem at all. And if folks would like to join, it's 1:30 to 5 on Saturday. And yeah, you're all invited. Thanks.
Thank you, staff. Now, is there anything else? No? Okay. Now I'm gonna pass it on. Our last subcommittee report is the subcommittee on the structural oversight. We will be selecting subcommittee co-chairs later today for this subcommittee, but for the most recent meeting, full commission co-chairs, Ajay and Christian fill in. So I will ask them to give the report of on this subcommittee.
Thank you. So we've met once, I believe. I think that's right, December 1st. And basically, like everyone else, we did a round robin to discuss who we wanted to be briefed by. And we talked a lot about officers that have misconduct cases against other officers, and talking to them and their lawyers, and talking to PAC and a bunch of other similar recommendations, I think, to other people, other committees, I mean. And then we reviewed the charter 2 through 10 sections related to any parts that were related to structural oversight. And so after we reviewed that, we discussed a little bit, we had questions about how the subcommittee relates to other subcommittees, because obviously there's going to be a lot of interchange and overlap to some extent, but we don't want there to be too much overlap, or, you know, in some cases, maybe no overlap at all, and just making sure to stay within the scope of what we need to do. So that was kind of an ongoing thing to think about. And then what else? I think we also, we just discussed areas of agreements on the barriers and best practices. Like we, we think talking about like outcomes, collective bargaining, limitations of discipline, Commissioner Debbie made a wonderful document that was a really great resource, and we discussed that the outline, which again, I think had more parts of the charter that we could reference as far as like what our actual task was and what our scope was. So again, thinking about like, what is our scope? Are we staying within our scope? And then we decided as like next steps, we were going to do some more research about each of the different charters. And so we divided it up between us to do more research on that, like the charter as relates to structural oversight. And I think that was it. If anyone else has anything to add, feel free to chime in.
No, that from my end, that was about right. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. And staff?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the particular categories for actually all three subcommittees are in the chat. So there are 9 different kind of areas of focus for this particular subcommittee, and they're all listed in there for those who may be interested.
Thank you. Co-chair Christian?
Hi, yeah, actually, I did want to share one interesting piece of information that came out of the structural oversight subcommittee that I wrote a note on. Commissioner Handelman had made a public comment that was new information to me, and I thought it might be useful for everyone to know that the PPA has the authority to have a final say on any policy change that comes through. I thought that was interesting and useful in considering how we're going to move forward, particularly for the structural oversight subcommittee, but I just thought it was an interesting piece of information in general as well. I think it might be a new thing too. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-chair Christian. Staff?
Yeah, so just on that point, and maybe Commissioner Dan might want to clarify as well, but I believe that the authority granted to the PPA in their collective bargaining agreement is to have the final review, it's not that they have final. The word "say" can be interpreted in multiple ways, so I want to be clear that it's the final ability to give input following like chronologically after other entities are able to give input, and not necessarily decision-making authority. Is that accurate, Commissioner Dan?
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to dig up the chat from that meeting. I'll copy and paste that back in. But yeah, that is accurate. And my comment was that, you know, the general public has either 15 or 30 days to comment on these, and then the Police Association, and I think the Police Commanding Officers Association does not have this in their contract. But anyway, the Police Association specifically says they get to look at the final draft. So that means they don't look at it with the rest of us. They get to look at it after that and determine for them, you know, with their own lens, whether they think it's going to affect their workplace, and so they can argue that if you don't fix this the way we want, then we're going to file a grievance. So I think there's a lot of power in that, even though it's not, as you say, the final say.
Thank you, Commissioner and Co-chair Dan. Is there any other questions or comments? Okay. Then we're gonna move to a community engagement report. And I will ask the staff to do it.
Hello, good evening. That's me. My name is Austin Foster. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the community engagement person. So let's see here. Want to just quickly go over some things with y'all. We've got upcoming events. We did land on an event date for our next event, which is going to be January 11th. After some feedback and talking to commissioners and staff who were at the last in-person event that we did November 17th, like a good part of it, probably the first hour, I don't know if any of you were able to listen to the recording, was a lot of questions, just questions. So I think it's important that we just hold kind of a general Q&A for people to come and ask questions to the PAC. The first like half an hour or 40 minutes of that was directed mostly to Catherine. Really, lucky that you were there. There was a lot of like lawyer specific questions that is, beyond my knowledge. And so I think it's going to be a really great opportunity to be able to just have an open dialogue forum, more of like a question and answer situation versus, like storytelling or going through traumatic events that have happened. Obviously, it's going to be a place for ideas, thoughts, conversation around like forward thinking what they want to see out of the PAC's work in this really important phase that you guys are in. So that will be January 11th. Details on that TBD. Stay tuned. And then also wanted to let you guys know, currently working on an event with Tirsa and Connie with Don't Shoot PDX and OJRC. And then also working on an event with Apano with CMOB and Christian. So if you are interested in helping either of us with any of those events, please let me know. And then also working on an event with Wisdom of the Elders, Naya and Nara with Charlie and Faith. So if you want to jump into any of those, I know you guys are all stretched so thin and you've been working so hard and there's so many meetings. So if you want more meetings, come on down, you know where I'm at. And then moving on, we will have a survey coming out soon on dates and logistics for upcoming community engagement events. I know the last time that we kind of reached out to y'all for feedback was back in April. So that will be coming to your inboxes soon so that we can make sure that, I'm executing these events in the way that y'all want. And then we've got a couple group events that I would like to kind of spearhead and get going as well. And so I'm looking for some member leads, basically like the other ones where maybe you've got an interest in this organization, or maybe you have somebody there. And even if your member leadership is that you can do an introduction email for me, that's huge. That goes a long way because I have been having some trouble getting the organizations to get back to us. So would love if anybody has any connections at ERCO. Would love to do an event with them, as well as Victoria had a great idea of doing a bilingual or Spanish speaking event with potentially the Latino network. So if you're interested in that, please give me a holler. And then I think it would be really great to involve the houseless community in this process a little bit more. And so, potentially reaching out to different shelters, maybe things like Rosehaven or Blanchet House, things like that. So if any of those are striking an interest, or you have any other group where you're like, hey, I know somebody here, let's like do an event with them, please call me, text me, or send me an email. And if you want to just, jump on any of those three I just mentioned, you can put it in the chat. And then as far as community engagement process, we're starting to see a lot more community input through events and as well as just advanced public comment. We are currently posting advanced public comment on each date's event page on the website. So you can go to the website, click on the events, and then you'll be able to see those advanced public comments for those meetings. And then we're also working on another resource that will show increased engagement over time and be able to somehow categorize community input so that it's easier for y'all to find out what's been said on a specific topic. Like if you're discussing, if you're discussing body cameras, for instance, we could potentially like file that information so that any community input that we've gotten already, like you guys can just go to a space to search for that topic. So again, like call me, text me, email me if you have any ideas on kind of this like process structure stuff. But that's kind of on the back end what myself and Samir have been working on, is trying to figure out, okay, now that we're getting this input from the community, how do we organize it, relay it back to the community safely so that people feel like protected and like they can still come forward. And then also how to relay that to y'all to make sure that you're informed as you guys are going through this important phase. Yeah, Commissioner Charlie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was actually going to wait till you're done, but
okay.
Okay, now
I just had one more, just a couple more things. Probably
Go ahead.
another minute. Okay. I'm also working on putting together a flyer, just kind of a generic flyer to go in coffee shops, community centers, shelters, different nonprofit organizations, offices, maybe, about the PAC with a QR code that will be leading to our website, just for like ways to get involved, just trying to like get out there in any way we can, because we're not allowed to have our own social platforms. And that's how I have built, community involvement in the past for like community engagement events that I've ran. So, good old fashioned flyer. And even I've had some ideas about potentially like door hangers in certain neighborhoods of people that we potentially want to get like more involved in this process. So those are just some ideas. And then if we do have time, I would love to debrief the 2 listening sessions that we had in November. Hopefully y'all got a chance to listen to the recordings if you weren't able to come to both. I think there was a lot of really useful information shared, and we can either do, I guess I would kind of default to asking the co-chairs if you want to do these group debriefs in meetings, which I think you guys said that you wanted to. So if you'd rather debrief with me one-on-one and you feel more comfortable that way, please let me know. I have debriefed with a couple of you individually, but just kind of wanted to open it up for a minute or so. I'm not sure how much time we have. If anyone wanted to debrief the November 3rd virtual listening session or the November 17th.
Austin, thank you very much. Before we go to the debrief, because you give us a lot of very important and future, and before we go to the debrief, please hold your debrief thoughts and just go to questions about the future engagement, and then we pass to the debrief. And I know Commissioner Charlie, she was waiting for us a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. So these events that you're planning, these are going to be in-person events?
TBD.
Okay.
It will be dependent upon like what y'all want after we do that survey. And then also up to the organization, because I know you've mentioned that a couple organizations aren't doing anything in person.
Right. And so, but if they are, will there be the hybrid option? Is that something you can ask the organization about and see what they want?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I'll have that in the survey that I'm going to send out too.
Okay, good. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Charlie. Any other question about the future engagement opportunities or meetings before we debrief the past or comments about the past? First, questions. Any question about what's going on in the organizations or ideas? Thank you for putting different ideas. Okay, now we're gonna have, because we have a very important discussion. Everything is important, right? But we have in the agenda, we're gonna have 5 minutes for the brief, and we can start now. And again, this is a debrief for the last engagement meetings and the content of these events. Yeah, Commissioner Catherine?
Yeah, I'll start. I just had a couple of comments. The first is that I really feel like folks came with questions, but also had an expectation maybe of a report out from us about what we're doing, where we're at, why we're confident that our work is going to make a difference. I will say we are met with, I mean, it's sort of a reflection of where we're at in the city, that people come in really believing nothing's going to change, and, you know, sort of prove to us that we should even engage in this process, because you know, why should we when we've engaged in previous processes and nothing has happened? So I think maybe to set the right tone and also to head off a lot of those questions, all legitimate, but I feel like we've heard that now. So coming out maybe with a presentation that is maybe not so much the nuts and bolts, here's the process and here's where we're at in the process, but really getting at how, you know, how we believe our work is going to make a difference, and how we believe we're going to get to the finish line, and how we believe that the current construct is different than previous constructs and actually does have a chance of really making a meaningful difference in our community. So I think people kind of want to hear that before they're willing to engage, and I don't blame them. I mean, why should they invest if they don't feel like there's anything to come out of it? So, you know, so that's one piece that I came away with. I feel like it would be more productive if we began in that way, and then went to questions. So that's my first comment. And my second comment, which is really unrelated, but I just want to capture it. I think for the work that we're doing right now on both individual accountability, officer accountability, and systemic changes and oversights and accountability, is that both sessions, you know, I felt like there was a pretty distinct set of comments and concerns raised about sexual harassment and the treatment of you know, the sexual harassment of people as a part of their experience of the police, and the particular issues associated with that, you know, whether it's you know, male officers and female, you know, people who are being arrested or some other mix. It just felt like that was a theme, and I'm not sure we've caught that in our outlines at this point, but I feel like we need to be thinking about that one, because it's coming up repeatedly, that people who have bad experiences with the police, their experiences sort of go from bad to horrific when this sexual harassment layer is added in, and that was a theme that we heard at both sessions. So I just want to flag that for the work that we're doing now, because I think it's relevant as we move forward. We just don't want to forget or overlook something that is really coming out that strongly from the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Catherine. Commissioner Charlie, and then Commissioner Dunn.
Right, so what I got out of those two sessions was especially some advocates to kind of walk them through, have someone that they from community that they can trust to walk them through the process of complaints, and such as sexual harassment or whatever other police brutality or behaviors that need to be reported, because they don't want, they don't trust the police. And I don't know that there's anything we can say to get them to trust the police, but it's going to be what we provide for them and how we can show them that those values that I listed off, and how are those actually going to be implemented going forward, so yeah, some kind of presentation of what our goals are and the values attached to that. And yeah, it's going to be a hard sell no matter what. But we definitely need to show them we're doing something different than that's ever been done before. And so, yeah, and we heard the disappointment in that they wanted to know where the commissioners were, why there were only 4. That was a real moot point, that if we really cared, we should all be there. And I know we're not all allowed to be there, but if at all possible, we should be there in as many numbers as possible. They want to see our faces. They want to hear our voices. They want to see people that look and sound and maybe experience the things they've experienced. That might be a way to get them to trust us.
Thank you, Commissioner Charlie. Thank you. We only have a couple more minutes, but I will go with Commissioner Dan and then Commissioner Fate.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So I want to echo both the previous commissioners that, first of all, I really think it's important to be very clear what the commission is and what it isn't up front, because I think some people think that we are the new oversight board, which we're not, right? So we have no power to process their complaints or take care of them. We can try to set up a system that will. The other thing is that with regard to the comment that only 4 people showed up to the in-person, I read back the notes, and it does not seem that anybody made a comment, even though I was very unambiguous in my long emails that I wrote, that I wanted to be there, but I would only have been there if there was a hybrid option. And I think it should have been stated. More of the commissioners would probably be here if we had a hybrid option. And I think that we should always provide a hybrid option, at least for we commissioners to be there, especially with COVID back on the rise and these other respiratory diseases that are filling up hospitals. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Fate?
Yeah, I was at the in-person session and definitely heard that feedback, and it felt like we really just took a listening posture of it. We could not have defended, it was not an appropriate time to say, well, meetings law say only 10 of us can be here, and some of our commissioners, all the things. So we really took a listening posture of like, yes, acknowledged and fair critique. But to echo Commissioner Charlie's perspective, it just really seemed like people wanted to talk to us. And so some of the feedback that I've given Austin is, particularly when we're asking potentially really vulnerable questions, is there an opportunity for us to have smaller groups, or like an open house where you can have a one-on-one discussion, or that we have some trauma-informed counselors available. But it became really evident that once folks knew who the commissioners were in the room, they really wanted us to hear their experience and wanted to connect with us interpersonally. And so, yeah, that was really profound for me, and something that I think as we continue to do community engagement events is for folks, for my fellow commissioners to be open to, as you're comfortable meeting with people and listening. I think maybe that's a suggestion, is what it looks like for us to be really active listeners in community spaces, and holding some of like really, hard stories, and how we hold that for people.
Thank you, Commissioner Faith. We need to move on the next item on the agenda, but I really thank everyone who participated and give an ideas and the brief of the meetings. Was very valuable. Thank you. Now we're gonna move to slides 17 and 18. And we're gonna have a discussion of potential extension request. We will now move into discussions, starting with the conversation about whether or not PAC should ask the City Council for more time for its work. And I will pass it to the full commission co-chairs in a moment. But this is an open discussion. Remember that we ask to follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please let me be a facilitator and remember that the commission uses a weighted stack in our discussions. And finally, please be forward-looking in your comments. Would the co-chairs like to start the conversation?
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Cool. Hello, everyone. We're going to be chatting about requesting an extension from council. It's we've had, obviously, it's no secret that we're doing this on a really tight timeline, and I think some people have requested, maybe not requested, but some people have inquired about maybe doing an extension. So what we're doing today is talking about if there's interest in that. And we can go over what the next steps would be if there is interest in that. We don't have to reach consensus today. We can talk about this later as well. We can come to a consensus at another meeting. But if there is consensus today, that's fine too. And I think staff has some details on if you have questions about what the process is like. Some of the co-chairs know some of that as well. So feel free to ask questions. I don't know really where to start. I guess I understand the interest in it, and I feel like it's worthwhile discussing it. I guess I'll start there. Does anyone else feel like it's a worthwhile discussion? Does anyone else have any thoughts on it, on presenting an extension? Catherine?
Thank you. Commissioner Catherine?
Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you.
It would just be helpful for me to have a little bit more framing of the question. So our current deadline and what we're talking about, and I assume it's like extending to the full deadline that is in the DOJ settlement agreement. But can somebody just frame that discussion for the rest of us a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I'm not a great public speaker, so do you ask me the questions and I'll answer as I was going to frame it originally. Yeah, so this would be an extension of the current deadline, which I think is June 3rd or sometime in June.
June 9th.
June 9th, thank you. Yeah, I don't have the dates on lock, but I know the time periods. And I think the extension can go, the DOJ settlement officially says that the council needs to have a decision on our proposed new system by, I think, October 29th, maybe 23rd, something like that. Yeah. 29th, 23rd. So through there, we can request an extension, no problem. I mean, not no problem. We do have to like ask council for it. And there always is the possibility they could say no. And we can talk about that in a second, but just to give a little bit of framework, through that time period, we can absolutely ask for an extension. Beyond that, it gets a little bit trickier. But that chunk of time is kind of like the official, what we're allotted. Right now, council gave us the deadline of June 9th. And the DOJ has the extended, the one that's further down the line. So the one in June is from council, so we can ask for an extension on that. Beyond the October one is from the DOJ, so that's kind of more of a bit more of a hard stop. And you can ask for an extension beyond the October one. It's just more complicated because it's not just council that we'd have to request. It'd be a more complex process. Does that help a little bit? Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. I'm sorry. Because I see a staff has raised.
That's what I was going to say too. So that's great.
Staff, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'm happy to wait until after Co-Chair Jay, who also had their hand raised, if you'd like to go first.
Well, are you going to like clarify anything? Because if you are, then you
Yeah.
should jump in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so just to first off, the commission currently has not made a request of council. So the date remains at June 9th, although the city council did clarify that date in March and then later added the PAC to the settlement agreement in April. It's the city's position in terms of the city attorney's office and Deputy City Attorney Sarah Ames may be able to speak to this more, that there are currently two different requirements, a requirement from the court that the city receive a recommendation by October 29th, and a requirement from the city council to the commission to produce a recommendation by June 9th. An extension could adjust those dates and potentially bring those into alignment if granted by the city council. There is a text in the bylaws for how this happens. The bylaws of the Police Accountability Commission agreed to by the PAC in late March. And it says that during a regular meeting, a member may propose requesting that the city council extend the commission's work for a specified period. If the commission should agree to request this, city council may then decide to extend and to reappoint commissioners to additional terms or extend terms. And so to put a very fine point, I guess, on everything that Co-Chair Christian said, which is completely accurate, but to be a little bit more specific is that the conversation is essentially A, do you want more time from the city council? And B, how much more time? And as Co-Chair Christian said, if council would like to extend it through October 29th, they can do so of their own volition. If they want it to go October 30th or later, it would require court and DOJ sign off under the settlement agreement. Yeah. And then I'm not sure if there's any other questions, but happy to answer them as they come up.
Thank you, staff. Is there any more information before I pass it to the questions by the co-chairs, Christian or co-chair Ajay?
One thing I just wanted to add was this might be a good time to do it, to propose this, just because we're going to get a new city council and who knows what that city council will be like versus now. It seems like we do have someone that like believes in our work and sort of trusts us, and so when we ask for something, there's kind of some sort of goodwill there. And yeah, we don't have a relationship with the new council person, so we don't know how it's going to go. So that could be an incentive to propose this now, but also, we can also propose it in the new year when there is a new city council as well. So just one consideration.
Thank you, co-chair. Now I will pass it to Commissioner Charlie.
So I'm wondering, when would we have to have this request in to make sure that we have it in before the new person takes over? And do we have to extend it all the way to October, or is there a way to just add a couple of months? What would the benefit of that be? Can we wrap it up early then? I wonder that if we add a bunch more time, then we take our time. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I can answer one piece of that. The other parts, staff might have to step in. For the, my understanding is that if we add an extension, it doesn't have to be all the way through October. That's just the end point where it would be no longer asking just council, and we'd be having to send it to get the DOJ's confirmation as well. We can definitely add less time. We can add like 2 months. We can add 1 month. I don't know if it goes into weeks, but I'm assuming we can add less than all those months. The benefit, again, to my understanding, is that the way that it has been framed has been that, for example, we've been tasked with doing community engagement throughout the whole process. And if we extend it through, actually, I'm gonna let staff talk about this because I'm tripping over my words and I'm kind of forgetting as I'm saying. Apologies. I was gonna try and for it, but I'm not because I can't remember now. But yeah, we can definitely add less time if we want to. There is no need to do all the way through to the end. That's the one that I can answer. Okay, thank you. Staff, go ahead.
Thank you, Co-Chair. And staff, would you like to answer that specific question or wait for other questions from the commissioners?
I'll defer to the commissioners first.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Charlie and then Commissioner Sophia. Oh, Commissioner Charlie.
I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay, thank you.
But you can ask what's the benefits and what's the downside. Somebody can answer that.
Okay, the benefits and then that side. Thank you. The pros and cons. Commissioner Sophia?
Thank you. I wanted to kind of chime and work from some of the comments that Commissioner Charlie had already mentioned. You know, I'm personally thinking it wouldn't harm us to have maybe 30 days, but I think our work schedule should still stay on track as it is. And because I know how projects go with my work or anybody else's, you get to the end and then there's still stuff that you have to wrap up and you're kind of out of time. And I think adding a buffer for, I call it odds and ends, or as some folks say, sweeping out the corners, and moving out the rugs. I think we need to give ourselves some time for that, but I don't think we should be extending the time just because we can, and also because the more time you have, the more time you take. And that was something that pretty much happened in our last segment of work. So I don't want us to go back there again. So that's my comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia. Commissioner Dan?
Oh, thank you. So I posted in the chat, and I don't necessarily want these answers to interrupt what I'm thinking because I have a hard time focusing. So I posted in the chat that I do not see the October 29th date in the agreement, only that council has 2 months after we propose something to propose amendments to the settlement agreement. And I posted a link where you can look at the settlement agreement yourselves. I want to know, I really want to note that we didn't finish our organizing phase, really until the middle of May. We started in December and we finally finished our first final organizing document sometime in the middle of May. And one reason for that was that there was one meeting where we didn't have quorum, and we're still working on that quorum issue. And then there's been other meetings that have been canceled for similar reasons. And those things might happen again. So I don't, I would like to see the full timeline of the other phases to understand everything. But here's my recommendation. I mean, I've been talking about extending this deadline for months and years, that we should ask them for the full extension till October 29, because that's the 18 months that literally is what it says in the settlement agreement. But we should try to get it done 2 months earlier than that. And then if we have these cancellations and other things and other odds and ends that Commissioner Glenn was talking about, then we'll have the extra time if we need it. But wouldn't it be great for us to deliver something early? We will look like big heroes. So that's my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Fate?
I think I fall squarely in between my colleagues, Sophia and Dan, of it seems like there is the choice of resources or time, and we want to ask for time. Could we not ask for resources to get done quicker? So that is just a consideration. I don't fully know what that means, but it feels like a lot of pressure for a volunteer body. And for us to then take on more work longer to me is nonsensical in a system that is funded by the city. So can we, I don't know what the ask I'm making is, but are there available resources, city resources to help us get this done quicker? Because I guess the alternative is that we spend more time. So that's what comes up for me. I'm not opposed to extending it longer. And I like the idea of getting it done quicker, but I'm also just very aware of our political capital and making the request for more time, like that we are just taking our leisurely time about this. And so how do we message that, as I think we all know we've been working very hard and as quickly as possible. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Fay. Commissioner Debbie, and then Commissioner Obi.
Did staff need to say something first? I see Samir's hand.
Yeah, there's quite a bit here. I think, thank you for breaking it up, because I think we might lose track otherwise of a lot of questions. I think it might make sense to first kick it to Sarah Ames about the question in the chat about October 29th, and then I have responses on all the other parts, if that makes sense. Does that work for you? Sorry, I kind of just volunteered you, Sarah, but yeah.
Yes, that's fine. The October 29th date is not in the agreement. The date in the agreement, and thank you, Dan, for the link. I used it. In paragraph 195B is within 18 months of the date this paragraph is entered as an order of the court. And the judge, I think some of you were in attendance, did agree to these settlement agreement amendments on April 29th. And so that's how you get to 18 months. Past that is the October 29th.
Yeah, thanks. So it is completely within the commission's authority to end on an earlier date than the final deadline. You know, the capacity of the commission to get an extension is something that there's several factors on, but one of them has to do with Faith's questions about resources, which I think I have both a direct and indirect answer to, Commissioner Faith, in just a moment. But with relation to, you know, there was a quarterly report presentation that then co-chairs Lavisa and Seema and Faith went to, and during that meeting there was a lot of reaction from council members during the meeting as well as outside of the meeting about, you know, being impressed with the amount of work that's being done and being surprised at the sheer volume of different things that is happening, that are happening with the commission at any given moment. And, you know, in terms of how to make that humane so that the individual member doesn't have to be at 3 different meetings a week, it becomes something that you do subcommittees and things like that. And then we end up with that takes time to then refer documents too, right? So things get stretched in order to make it something that isn't asking for too much of the individual volunteer, exactly as mentioned by a couple members. So that's sort of the trade-off that was identified. And I can't speak to whether council would do it or not, but I do know that there's an openness and they've asked us if there will be a request, which, you know, we don't know until the commission were to decide. And we can't really have that conversation as staff support until the commission is clear that they would like that to be done. To the question about resources, yes, in theory, there are lots of resources available, but there's sort of a direct and an indirect. The direct is yes, but it takes time. There's a lot of city processes to get done for everything, and you can get them, but it takes, you know, sometimes weeks or months to navigate and sending, you know, several follow-up emails and calls and things like that to get other parts of the city to, you know, ensure that it happens. And that's, you know, occasionally part of the challenge is you can get those resources, but the one resource that you can't get without the extension request happens to be time. if there is a request, as many of you have identified, then of course, that's how you get the time. And then the other part of it is this relates as well to the budget cycle. And so in terms of getting the resources necessary just to sustain the current operations, as well as to ask for more into fiscal year 2023, 2024, asking for an extension for the full length of time you might want helps to get that in the budget requests that are happening from December to February are really getting developed. And I'm thinking about things like independent legal counsel, for example, as well as interpretation, facilitation, community engagement support, all of those types of things. And so from the perspective of, I think it's up to you to determine when and how, but in terms of how many bites of the apple you might get with extension requests, that's, I think, where it would be a little bit more challenging to try and go back again for a second one in the future. And for those who've worked on the political side, I no specific reason, but I've observed that. And I could answer more questions, and I'm sure there will be some, so I'll stop here though.
Thank you, staff. Now we'll pass it to Commissioner Debbie.
So I'd like to agree with people who are suggesting the October 29th as the request, because I kind of want to avoid having, hopefully this wouldn't happen, but there's a possibility we might feel like we need to, say we pick sometime like the end of July or something, and then we need more time. And having to go back a second time, as Samir said, I think there's some risk involved in that. I'd rather, and to me, this October 29th time, because it's consistent with the time frame that's in the judge's order, I think that gives us a kind of a solid rationale for asking for that date. And I over the years as a League of Women Voters member, I've paid attention to a lot of different boards and commissions in the city. And I don't think I mean, there may be some out there that have done this, but I don't know if I've ever seen any that are meeting twice a week. I mean, we're doing a lot. And I think giving ourselves a little bit of wiggle room might help, maybe avoid resignations due to exhaustion, that kind of thing, because I'm a little worried about that for probably some of us. So yeah, it might give us kind of a small break to have that breathing room. And yeah, if we get it done by July 30th, that would be great. But if knowing that, again, that it's consistent with the settlement agreement, and hopefully we won't have to go back and ask a second time, I think that kind of strengthens that approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Staff, Commissioner Obi has raised his hand for a long time. I will pass it to him. Commissioner Obi.
Sure, thank you. Just a quick question, and I think less important, but when the time frame in regards to us submitting our final document to the city council, if they voted no on it, that they'd have to make their own document and hopefully get it approved. But does that leave them enough? If they voted no and we went to October 29th, does that mean they have 0 days to do it? And I don't think that's going to happen, but is that the case?
Thank you, Commissioner Obi. I will pass it to staff.
Yeah, sorry, I can't speak to that particular question. I think with relation to the earlier point is why I raised my hand, which is the planning. And I think there was a question from Commissioner Dan in the chat about the time frame. The staff's role in terms of project management is to ensure that there are enough meetings to get the work done. And so scheduling them appropriately to that, and it's challenging to balance that against trying not to have so many meetings that people resign. And without naming any specific person's specific situation, I can tell you that it has been a factor so far in multiple situations of folks who have left the commission, is just the pacing and the number of meeting commitments. And so part of it is trying to stretch it out and saying, you can have 3 subcommittees in a phase and the person doesn't have to be on all 3, so you don't have to make all those meetings. But part of it is the broader structure as well. And so in trying to create that plan to get to June 9th, we've sort of penciled in several versions of speculative things. And when I say speculative, I mean, we don't know how many subcommittees are going to be in the next phase, so how many meetings they'll need and things like that. But In order to get from here to there with 4 phases in, tomorrow's the 1-year anniversary of the commission. Just to give you that reference point, met for the first time on December 9th. So I was going to congratulate at the end. I will again, but congratulations on that. But also to get to that point in, 6 months and a day with 3 full phases and a part of this one left to go, you can do math and see we're talking about slightly less than 2 months for each one at the current date. And some of them are designed to be a little shorter. That was anticipated during the agenda and scope, but this particular phase was anticipated at the time to be one of the longest ones, the one we're in, powers and duties phase. And so, that in order to get there, it does require a certain level of being packed to have everything get done in about 7 weeks per phase, which is fairly absurd. And I think some of the co-chairs in particular, and also the members of the Officer Accountability Subcommittee can speak to the challenge of trying to redo a system that was developed, not consistently, but in parts over several years in 4 to 5 meetings. But yeah, that's the part there. What I will say, and the part that I think is the most relevant to making a decision sooner rather than later, you don't have to make one today, and what your decision is entirely up to the members, is also that in the community engagement framework adopted by the commission in March, it commits to returning to communities at each phase. So the importance of that is, if we don't know the end date now, we have to plan a lot of meetings. And then if the extension were to be given on June 8th, otherwise it'd be June 9th, but if you get them more time June 8th, then the community engagement work that gets done at that point becomes, here's all the discussions that the commission has already had. What do you think of that? As opposed to, we're developing it and can you be a part of the development? And both parts of that are important. And in the discussion over community engagement framework, I actually was looking at a conversation from back then, and Commissioner Catherine and Commissioner Faith both brought this up, that those are 2 parts of the conversation that both need to happen. And so that's why it's helpful to know the date early so that we can sketch out the plan. But to directly answer Commissioner Dan's question, about 7 weeks per phase beyond this one, if it ends around the end of the month of January, would be the timeline. And that's structure and details, as well as transition plan and broader system, as well as concluding phases. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. I will pass it to Commissioner Sima.
Greetings, everybody, and apologies for keeping my camera off. I'm a little unwell, but one of the things that I wanted to kind of bring up time-wise is that if we're asking for an extension down to the same date as the DOJ's request to get it for the city to get this in by, I don't think we would win even a vote from the city to delay it all the way down to that deadline. I would probably recommend considering before October for sure, but definitely not on or around that date.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Sima, and I will pass it to Commissioner Sophia. Commissioner Sophia, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm sorry, my computer just said battery low and I was struggling to put the.
Oh, you got disconnected or frozen. Staff, can you, or you were going to pass it to Sarah?
Yeah, before passing it to Sarah, I wanted to ask, just as a clarification question, in addition to whatever point, I have no idea what else you might say, but in addition to that, if you could also answer, whatever the time frame that the, if an extension request were to be made to a specific date, the council could choose to give an extension request to that date or a different date. Is that correct? And then whatever else you might want to say.
The council can always amend the measure before it and, take a friendly amendment and make that change if they make a different decision. I raised my hand because I wanted to reassure Commissioner Christian that the deadlines are cascading, that there's 18 months from the entry of the order for the commission to propose to City Council the changes. The council then has 60 days after receiving the commission's proposal to propose its amendments. So your extension would not eat up all of the council's consideration time. They still have the 60 days after your submission. The issue is, then, there's a cascading series, and then we have to get approval from the Department of Justice and a variety of steps farther, and it puts off the deadline to create the new oversight board and have it up and running. So that's kind of on the other end. There are people who are very anxious to get that going. So
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, is there any, Commissioner Sophia, we can go back to you now. Commissioner Sophia, can you hear? Yes.
Now I can hear you. Sorry. My computer went dead. I'm so sorry. But anyway, I don't remember what you guys were saying, but I did want to make just an overall comment listening to all of the input we've gotten so far. And I'm thinking that this idea of resources, if we could brainstorm out of the resources that we might need, thinking about the budget, how much we would need for a budget for those resources, and maybe asking for the maximum extension, whatever that might be, and reframing, if we get the extension, that is, reframing the phases, not to maximize that extension, but to, allow it to be a little less strenuous for the group. But I think we need to really look at what the resources are we need, how long it's going to take to get them, how much money do we need, and to really restructure this whole thing in a way, if it's approved, restructure it in a way that we're not waiting to the last minute to do anything. Giving ourselves that buffer that I still believe we need at the end, just in case, because there's always something that comes up at the last minute. So that was just my input for now. And thank you, guys.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia. Are there any more questions? Commissioner Dunn?
Oh, this is actually a comment. So, the Department of Justice has pretty much said that, and I think this is what's written in the settlement agreement too, that as long as we're showing a good faith effort to get this done, that they're going to be a little flexible about those deadlines. And I don't think anybody can argue that we have not made a good faith effort to try to build this new system. We've been meeting, as people said, 2 times a week, and some people 3 and more times a week if they're on a co-chair. So I think there's that good faith effort has been shown. I think that we shouldn't try to second guess what City Council is going to do. I agree that if we propose October 29th and they want to cut it back, let them do that. But I think we should, ask for as much as we can get, and then they'll decide. But I completely agree with the people who say we shouldn't ask for it and then end up having to ask a second time, because I don't think that would be looked on very favorably. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunn. And okay, Commissioner Catherine?
This is just a question. I'm a little confused about whether there's any value in requesting an extension until 60 days before the October 29th deadline, to allow that 60-day period from the council's action to be complete by the October 29th timeline? Or am I mixing up timelines? I just wasn't quite sure what Sarah said about that, whether if we took it all the way out to October 29th, then given that the council would then need an additional 60 days, whether that would delay things down the line. Or whether, I guess I'm just trying to understand how that 60-day period works.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Catherine. I will pass it to staff.
Yeah, the 60 days is after October 29th for city council. So they have until, I believe that's December 28th to submit it. Then after, there's 3 steps that occur after, 4 steps after the PAC makes a recommendation to council. Without getting too in the weeds, the direct answer to your question is that they have 60 days after October 29th. But for those who may be interested, that's 60 days in which to propose amendments to the settlement agreement that would accommodate the new oversight board. For example, there's IPR is in the settlement agreement. So in order to amend to create those changes that would be necessary, they have to propose those. The court and the DOJ then have to discuss those and come to agreement on them, which they do not have a deadline to do within that particular paragraph in the settlement agreement. And then after they do approve it, it comes back to the city council, who has 21 additional days after that in order to basically approve everything that's still out there, settlement agreement amendments and the code recommendation. And that begins the oversight board. And depending on the transition plan you develop in phase 5, there's up to a year where the different powers and duties could come into effect on day 2 or day 365. And it's up to the transition plan that you create when that is for each of the specific things. Oversimplifying to some degree, but yeah, so the 60-day timeline starts after the receipt deadline on October 29th.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Debbie?
So I just wanted to make sure Commissioner Catherine noticed that I think it was Commissioner Handelman copied the excerpts from the settlement agreement into the chat where you can actually read it for yourself when you have a chance. And then the other thing is, it's like, let's say we finished on September 29th, then that starts the clock on that 60 days for city council. So yeah, one thing has to finish and then the clock starts on the next phase. And it's all spelled out in those things in the chat. So it's, yeah, it'll make more sense if you read it.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Staff?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing. I believe I heard the word propose in a comment earlier, so I want to be clear that Commissioner Dan had proposed a particular proposal, which has a specific meaning here. So I wanted to know if it was possible to kind of look at that as sort of the framing for this conversation to help kind of narrow the field down and narrow the conversation on a little bit as to if the commission does have consensus around the idea that an extension is a good thing to request. And then well, actually I could pause there and then separately ask, about a date. But it may be helpful to say if even if there are differences of opinion on the date, if the idea of a consensus or the idea of an extension is something that you're interested in, that might also be helpful to know.
And I don't know, there's a specific way to ask the question, but I can ask the question if the commissioner have a consensus for us for extension, regardless of what day. Yeah, we do have a consensus for us for extension.
And then I guess the second part would be on, and this might require a little more discussion, but on the date, and I believe Commissioner Dan had proposed the October 29th date, but open to discussion before the idea of asking for a consensus yet.
Okay, Commissioner Dan?
I'd like to point out that Commissioner Glenn proposed October 29th as well. So not all on me. Thank you.
My apologies.
That's good. Okay, Commissioner Sophia?
Yes, I would like to propose that we have a resource list. As a group, we come up with what the resources we need so that staff can figure out what kind of a budget we need for that as well. In addition to a date. So that was just another request in between. Sorry, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia.
Yeah, it may be helpful to note in terms of that, we've been keeping notes on that as time has gone on from both full commission and subcommittee conversations and public meetings and also suggestions, and trying to look at what resources can be obtained through the budget processes. For example, the budget for facilitation was not originally there, and trying to ensure that there was a budget for that, for interpretation, for a second staff person, for part-time, administrative support. So all those different things are things we've been keeping up on, and would love more assistance in developing it. The one that's currently very directly in progress that has been discussed most recently by the commission is independent legal counsel. And so to that point, that's in progress too. And so hopefully it can happen pretty soon. I think what'll likely happen is it'll be a smaller pool of money this at first, and then requesting more to continue it, but we'll find out. And that's definitely something that we can implement and probably just ask over an email and ask for folks to come back and then explain what the list is as the budget request gets developed later on by the sort of organizational unit of the city org chart that we're in. Do people have thoughts on the date beyond what has already been said?
I mean, I can ask, is there any strong opposition to the idea of asking to City Council for the extension to October 29? Is not a strong opposition? Then do we have a consensus to ask for extension to the City Council for October 29? Yeah, we have consensus. Okay. Thank you. Okay. We need a second discussion, and we have to move on to the second discussion. And I will pass it to staff.
Thank you.
About definitions. Thank you.
So I know we're short on time, so I'll make this quick. This was sort of reformulated to more of a quick briefing and Q&A. Last time, a month ago, on the 10th of November, the discussion was around the definitions required under City Council resolutions that the commission needs to create. There are 9 of them or 10 of them, and some of them were anticipated to be as we go. There'll be conversations that are happening anyway. So the first definition is the name of the new oversight system, for example, and that's really a decision. It's under the definition section. So it doesn't make sense to have a separate conversation around it, was the feedback that commissioners gave last month. So in looking at this, just quickly to review it, staff went through and determined which things are going to have already been assigned somewhere else. To take those off the table, or not off the table, but essentially say you don't need to define them as a full commission during this phase of work. And so this is all under the resolution scope of work under Exhibit A of 37548. The name of the new oversight system is something that the agenda and scope directly assigned to phase 4 structure and details. The operational budget, and again, this is what's listed under definitions. Some, not all immediately come to mind as a definition question. Operational budget is also something that's defined under agenda and scope. The reasons that a board member can be removed are also something that the PAC has already under the agenda and scope assigned to a different phase. Independent judgment is not explicitly defined as any particular conversation anywhere else. Interference by other bureaus and commissioners is highlighted. it's a little bit hard to, it's implicit in a lot of conversations, and perhaps the same one as independent judgment. But in turn, the only thing is whether the new oversight board fits under a particular part of the org chart or not. And if that is the same conversation as independent judgment, maybe it's under phase 4 or 5, or maybe it's something that the commission would like to discuss this phase of work. Existing barriers, the first half of that of identifying them, you've already done. The second half of make suggestions on how to overcome these barriers is the as we go suggestions for each particular part. But the independent judgment one on this slide is sort of the one that does not have a designated home yet, essentially on the agenda and scope document. Duties of the board. This was something that is also suggested as we go, and as you can see in the particular other types of misconduct the board should investigate, that is something that was discussed as being part of the subcommittee on officer accountability. And I know they've already started conversations that relate to this question. Accountability. This might obviously seem at first to be under the officer accountability subcommittee as well. But there is the second half of this that includes the relationship between communities and the police is a little bit broader than the sort of individual situation and individual person conversation. So it's bolded because this is something that is broader than a single subcommittee. And then discipline is again something that's pretty clearly under the scope of work of the subcommittee on officer accountability. And then the City Council allowed the PAC to define any other terms that the commission feels need to be defined. And so that's kind of open-ended. And so in summary, there are 3 terms that the full commission would, or 3 possibilities that the full commission would need to possibly define. And this is a conversation for future meetings, but I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of it. One is, what is independent judgment? One is, what is accountability in that broader sense that includes the relationship between communities and the police? And then if there are any other terms the commission would like to define for the sake of a definition that don't fit into another conversation around, if you're talking about any of the decisions that are being made might have a sort of ancillary definition developed, but if there's anything that requires a broader commission conversation, that could be held here too. But at a minimum, these 2, independent judgment and accountability, are definitions required of the PAC by City Council, but not assigned anywhere. Any questions or thoughts on that before we move to the next item? Okay, I'll pass it back over to facilitators.
Thank you. Okay. This is an open discussion, and I'm gonna, we ask you for our normal discussion rules. Please be brief, be facilitated. And remember, the commission uses a stack in our discussions, and be forward looking. Well, the co-chairs would like to start. We only have a couple minutes. Commissioner Obi?
I just wanted to propose, I guess a short meeting, I guess it's split in 2, but number 1, with the current city council, like inviting people to our next meeting to speak if there's any possibility, and then for the future city council inviting other council members to speak as well, just to kind of gauge their feelings about this process too. I know that Commissioner Hardesty was a champion kind of this of our commission, and I think it would be, since she won't have the same power she does after December, might be great for her to come on by and speak, or maybe give us some suggestions of how she envisioned it if she would have been more part of the process coming on. And then conversely, the new commissioner, if he wanted to speak too, because 82% of Portlanders believe in this process. So I think it's something that any person on the city council would hopefully want to weigh in. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Obi, and that's a very good suggestion. I just want to keep everyone on topic. And the topic that we have is definitions, but we definitely put it, take a note. And before I pass it to everyone or everybody else, we need to keep it on definitions. Co-Chair Ajin?
This isn't actually related to definitions. I was just going to say that that is something that multiple people have requested and something that we are trying to do as far as getting Commissioner Hardesty. And we're working on it, is all I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we have a copy on, have a conversation on definitions? Any comments about definitions? It's,
so, oh, seriously.
yes, Co-Chair Tirsa, please.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly comment on the term accountability. It has come up a lot. I mean, that's what we're working towards, creating a system where an oversight system where police will be accountable. And as far as for definition of accountability, I am thinking keeping the focused within having accountability within the police bureau being civilian focused, and that's sort of where my thoughts are. Just instead of trusting the bureau to hold themselves accountable, having a civilian oversight system, which is what we are doing, hold them accountable to their actions. So just being people focused, culturally focused system of accountability.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tirsa. Yes, I will pass it to Co-Chair Sophia, and it's as long as some definitions. I mean,
Yes.
Sophia, Commissioner Sophia.
Yes, it is still on definitions. I was thinking as the co-chair was, the commissioner was talking, you know, these are things that maybe we could ask for input in our community sessions as well, to see what the community, what they think about. I mean, how do they think of it? Maybe that's something we can put out there just to kind of do a brainstorm session. What does it look like in the community? As a community member, how do you feel accountability is? And that kind of will help us maybe frame it in another way. And also it might help when we have these sessions, the community building, or not the community building, community engagement sessions, they have something that we can start out with, maybe as a topic, maybe, I don't know. I'm just brainstorming that idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia. Very good idea. Thank you. Co-Chair Ajin?
Yeah, that was an amazing idea. I also want to big up that idea, and also thinking about, especially in terms of accountability, I wonder if there are almost like sub terms that might be worthwhile to define. Specifically, I think of accountability because that definition is not, I think staff already said this, is not about individual officers or even about, you know, a whole department. It's sort of like about police as a whole and their relationship to the community and how they're accountable there. And it's hard to know what police should be accountable for unless you have an understanding of institutional oppression and also police's relationship to community members in terms of being like a repressive force against social change. And this has been, you know, something that is, you know, been for decades. And so, yeah, I wonder if anyone, I guess it's a question, if anyone thinks there might be terms that are worthwhile that deal with either independent judgment or accountability that are related, that could help those definitions.
Thank you, Co-Chair We need to move on because the time, and we will continue this discussion, but all your ideas, we keep track and we took notes. Now we have to go to public comment. And we will now take open public comment on the issues that PAC is discussing. Or community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length and raise their hand in Zoom if you like to speak. Okay, I don't see anybody from the public that wants to speak. Now we're gonna move to member curiosities. It's slide 31st and 32nd. And I will pass it to the co-chairs.
Sorry, I'm not prepared.
Sorry, and you know, is there, Commissioner Debbie, is there something about our discussion? Or if you want to do something about member curiosities, I think I need to pass it to staff first and then the co-chairs and then I can.
That's fine. I had a member curiosity when we get to that. I can wait.
Okay, thank you. Staff?
I was just gonna give the explanation of it, if that's helpful.
Oh, I could do it now. I
Okay,
just
sorry.
had not scrolled down my notes and I was too enthralled with our previous discussion. I was thinking. Thank you though. Member curiosities is a brief period of time on the agenda where members of the commission can bring items to discuss. This could be questions or follow-ups, an article, it could be lots of different things. And we won't be voting on anything at this time. It's not a voting period. It's just a place to for people to share things, or have questions or whatever. We want to give space to multiple members to share, so please take 1 minute per person. Just be mindful of your length of time speaking. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Debbie. Sounds like our Commissioner Iona, right? Yeah, I'm trying to use the last name.
Thank you, Chair Christian. And remember to keep it 1 minute, keep it brief. Commissioner Debbie?
Yeah, so I realize I'm not entitled to an answer at this point probably, but I'm curious kind of what the timeline is for getting our 2 new commission members before city council and appointed so they can start helping out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Obi?
Hey, I would just like to, now that it's the right section, formally shift my comment from definitions to now, saying that it would be great to have some commissioners come in. Thanks, guys.
That's a perfect moment. Thank you, Commissioner Obi. Commissioner Charlie?
I'm curious if they're taking new applications for those positions. Those 2 positions for commissioners.
For commissioners, thank you. Any other topic or question? Yeah, Commissioner Dunn?
Well, this is a related question. I mean, I know we don't try to name people's names, but there's a commissioner that was appointed in August that hasn't really been attending meetings, and I don't know if they're intending to stay on. And I think it would be helpful for us to know, especially because the quorum issue still hasn't been resolved, whether we're going to expect more vacancies soon. So my 2 questions really are about other potential vacancies and is anything being done to push forward the quorum issue with council? Thank you.
Thank you. Staff?
Yeah, so I'll just answer kind of all of that together. There are invitations to some commissioners. Others have been asked whether they have preferences for which part of the PAC to come into, whether they have a preference for a particular subcommittee, and then can come there or do like a separate sort of thing, a briefing or something like that. So that's in progress. With relation to vacancies, there is a ongoing process to fill those 2 vacancies. It got bumped, pun not intended, because of the fall budget monitoring process, also known as the bump, later. So that I think it should be happening soon as there's a final date. That'll be confirmed with the membership, but filling those 2 vacancies, and then I can't speculate to any other vacancies that may or may not happen at this point, and I don't know the answer to Commissioner Charlie's question. At present, they've been going out of the original pool of applications. There were a lot, and there were a lot of really great people out there who applied that council has been fortunate enough to be able to appoint subsequently. So I don't know if that'll change at any point. But if it does, and it were to hypothetically be an open application for new membership, then that link would certainly be circulated to all the current members to circulate to your networks and things as well. But as of right now, I know that the process that's ongoing to fill the 2 current is based off of the current pool. Yeah, and I'll pass it over to facilitator Laura.
Thank you, staff. And now, since we have you, can we go to the next item, the PAC approval of subcommittee co-chairs, subcommittees on access to information and structural oversight, please.
Yes, so in the interest of time, I'm going to ask if we can maybe start with structural oversight, and say that at present there are 2 members that have expressed interest in it. And there are 2 positions vacant. It's a little bit more complicated on the other side, so we'll get to that next. But just wanted to start with that side of it and say, yeah, there are 2 folks who are interested in it. Commissioner Debbie, Commissioner Faith had expressed interest, and the process for this, by the way, is that when there are equal or less number of candidates than there are positions, it simply takes a proposal to approve folks, and then if there is consensus, then that's that, and it's completed at this time. Whereas if there are more than the number of candidates, then there is a balloting process that we'll talk about in a moment if that becomes relevant for the other subcommittee. So that's why starting with this one. So for the subcommittee on structural oversight, again, there are 2 candidates and 2 vacant positions. So if there's anyone who'd like to say anything on that, that would be appropriate at this time. And I'll let Victoria call in folks.
Yeah, co-chair Christian.
Hello, I would like to propose that Commissioner Aiken and Commissioner Iona be the new subcommittee co-chairs for structural oversight. Is that cool? Do we have consensus on that?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, is there any strong opposition would be the first question. Seeing none, is there any, yeah. Okay, and I saw general agreement earlier, so
Yes.
thank you. So congratulations to co-chairs, Debbie and Faith, of the subcommittee on structural oversight. And then moving to the other subcommittee, there is a co-chair currently in place, co-chair Obi, and there is 1 position open at this time. So I just wanted to kind of lay out there that with 2 members of the subcommittee who are interested in that position, there is a process that we were informed about by the city attorney's office. So what we would do, and I'll try to make this as simple as possible on the back end so that it's very transparent and also able to be resolved quickly. But essentially, we would need to send out a ballot, which would basically be a survey that has 2 options, and give folks an opportunity to submit that survey. And then after that, we would announce the outcome of it, and one person would join Commissioner Obi. But the other thing that I would do, just to help potentially save the time of it, is give folks a day or 2 to consider who, if they'd like to step up and be a candidate still, they'd have the opportunity. And if they'd like to withdraw and stand aside, to give the opportunity for the commission to have a consensus position. I know that that can take time to develop, so not going to ask for it now because folks have mentioned that they need to leave soon. So not going to necessarily force that to happen now, but just wanted to explain that process. And then hopefully within, let's say, 4 or 5 days from today, we'd be able to say this is who the co-chair of the subcommittee is, joining, of course, Commissioner Obi, who has done a really good job standing alone for the time being, and is much appreciated. So any questions on that process, just how it works? And again, this is something that we got somewhat unexpectedly from the city attorney's office on how to address it when there are more candidates than vacancies. So just start with process questions. Okay. Thanks. I know we've got a long garden plot, so I'll pass it over to back to facilitator Victoria on that subject.
Thank you. This is a time for facilitators, co-chair, and staff to summarize any items already brought up today, which didn't fit into today's agenda. We'll recap those items here and use them in developing future agendas. We won't be using this time to add new items not previously mentioned or to discuss any items, but we will use this list to develop future agendas so these items can be addressed. I will pass it to co-chairs first and then the staff for Commissioner Dan. I will have to pass it to the co-chairs for the meeting today. That's Christian, Commissioner Christian, Commissioner Tirsa, and Commissioner Aji first, and then the staff.
I don't have anything.
You don't have anything? Commissioner Tirsa?
I have 2 items. One was the request for a resource list worked on by the commission to include in a city budget request. And then the second one I have was there was also a request for a timeline to fill new commissioners' vacancies and additional information about any potential new vacancies. Those are the 2 that I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Tirsa. Commissioner Christian?
Yeah, I just have the approval of the subcommittee co-chairs for the access information subcommittee. So many words, sorry to remember. And then also the extension request. Those are the 2. Yeah. Thank you. I will pass it to a staff. Thank you, co-chair Christian.
Yeah, so I believe it was relatively early in today's agenda, but there was a conversation around ensuring that there's a direct conversation around the uniqueness of misconduct involving sexual harassment and sexual assault was brought up. And then there are a couple things within the discussions on definitions that I think came up as well from co-chair Tirsa that I want to kind of go back over and make sure I don't mischaracterize, but that I think need to be included in this as well for a future agenda. Yeah.
Thank you, staff. And you wanted to add something else?
Oh yeah, I asked if I'd be allowed to do the wrap up today. So I could say 3 things. Just first, that commission now accepts public comment in 3 ways. This was not 100% confirmed when we had the last full commission meeting, so wanted to mention that. The online web form has been there for a while, the voicemail and postal mail. The second thing is thank you to everyone for being here today. Thank you to all the members who attended, to the interpreters supporting access to meetings of the PAC and its subcommittees, to members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. Please submit advanced public comment prior to future meetings, and the next meeting of the full commission will be in January. Before adjourning, just wanted to say congratulations to everybody on by midnight tonight, 1 year of the PAC. because our first meeting was on December 9th of last year. So thank you very much. It is now 9:17 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much, and good night.